Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us online tonight. Obviously, the weather on it's Wednesday, January the 28th, and the weather today is such that believe everybody be safer and better off to just stay home. And so we didn't meet in our sanctuary, but we are going to continue with Bible study as we would not normally on Wednesday night, but we're going to continue where we left off. Before we get there, though, again, I do hope that everybody is warm and well, and I trust that you are. And if you weren't, you would let us know. I know prayer requests have been coming in on Facebook, but certainly if you need something else, we hope that you'll reach out to us, me or the deacons, and let us help in any way that we can. Um, this is I'm going to try to keep this to 15 minutes, as I usually do the videos, or I have been trying to. Um, but Wednesday night Bible study is my absolute favorite thing about being the pastor at Richland. And if you've never joined us for Wednesday night Bible studies, I want to encourage you to do that. Um, this won't be the same because part of what makes it great is the conversation that we're able to have, the discussion that we're able to have. We move slow and methodically through and look in as much detail as we can at each text. Um, and I grow and I learn as a result of it, and I think others do too. So I, I want to encourage you to try to be part of a traditional Wednesday night Bible study on Wednesday nights sometime when you can. But we're going to continue where we left off, and where we left off last week was we bumped into a verse in Mark chapter 14. We've been in Mark for several months now, and we got to a verse in chapter 14 that was a really heavy verse, and we just didn't have time to unpack it then. And to be quite honest, a 15-minute video is not even going to come close to unpacking this. But perhaps we could begin the conversation tonight. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read the verse to you, but then I want to also give you the context of the passage, what led up to this verse. But also, we need to look at the context of the relationship that Jesus had with one of his apostles called Judas, because that's who this verse is about. So if you have a Bible and you want to turn there, Mark chapter 14, verse 21 is the verse that we're going to look at tonight. And Jesus said this, "For the Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to the man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for him if he had not been born." So I think it's obvious why this is a heavy verse. This is a very bold statement that Jesus makes, and you have to ask, lots of questions that come to mind. First off, does Jesus mean this literally or figuratively? I mean, does he really mean he would be better off if he had never been born? And if so, then why did it all play out the way that it did? Could God not have stopped it? Could Jesus have stopped it? Could Judas have stopped it? And all of these are questions that I think arise as a result of thinking about something like this. And what adds to the questions is the fact that at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry, when he first calls the apostles, John tells us that Jesus knew from the very beginning that Judas was going to do this. And again, you have to ask, okay, well, could Judas have chosen not to, or was he predestined and doomed in some way to do this? And if Jesus knew that, why didn't he respond? Why did he not allow Judas in, or why did he not make sure that the person that betrayed him was somebody that was outside the fold? I mean, all of these questions come up, and we certainly will not answer all of them tonight. But again, maybe we can begin to think about them a little bit. And what I want to do, very simply, is just offer 5 ideas as to why Judas' betrayal of Jesus happened the way that it did. And that really begins with the words of Jesus. In John's Gospel, Jesus quotes Psalm 41:9, and it has to do with a psalm of David and David's being betrayed by a close friend, and it becomes a foreshadowing of what was going to happen in the relationship between Judas and Jesus. But that's just the beginning. The Old Testament is full of prophecies that are almost eerily specific in regard to what Judas was going to do, from right down to the amount of money that was Judas was given to betray Jesus, and what happened to the money, and what it was used to purchase. I mean, there were very specific details in the Old Testament, and I think that's one of the reasons it happened the way that it did, was to fulfill the Old Testament as it had been written. And even early in Acts, Peter even notices that that's what happened. I mean, I have to wonder sometimes if Peter and the other apostles ever thought, if they ever thought about it, like what they were close with Judas. I don't think any of them had any idea that he was going to do what he did. Um, and I'm sure they second guessed things and probably looked back and thought, well, maybe I should have noticed this or that. But in looking back on it, Peter notices that the way things played out were the way things had to play out according to Old Testament prophecy. And so that's the first reason I think that it happened the way that it did. Uh, the second thing is more of just an observation, I guess. Jesus is betrayed by a friend, and I mean that's one of the most painful things. I mean, you think about a couple, divorce. If a couple divorces as a result of a betrayal, I mean, there's just that intimate hurt that you can't have any other way other than being in close relationship with somebody. Um, that's the relationship Judas and Jesus had, and so for someone who was a close friend to commit such a despicable act toward Jesus, uh, that's just unsettling for all of us, And then for it to be the act that it was that led to the most unjust act in the history of the world, the crucifixion of Jesus. I think it may be worth noticing that even in this ugliest of circumstances, the result of it was the redemption of humanity, right? I mean, in the ugliest of circumstances, God used that to bring honor and glory to Himself and to bring the hope of redemption to us. So just the observation here that God can use the ugliest of circumstances to do beautiful things, and maybe that's part of the reason it happened the way that it did, to illustrate that for us. The third thing that I would want you to notice is that Judas was an apostle, and from the very beginning, Judas was nothing was withheld from Judas. He was on the front line of everything that happened. He saw the miracles. He heard the teachings. He was even sent out with the authority to perform miracles. And yet, his heart was never in the right place. Again, Jesus talks about this from the beginning. Like he described Jesus in ways that, Jesus described Judas in ways that indicated that his heart was never in the right place from the very beginning. And yet Jesus still invited him into the fold. Jesus still gave him authority to do great things. And then Jesus would go on in a more general way to teach that there were going to be people who would come along and say, didn't we prophesy in your name? Didn't we do this? Didn't we do that? And Jesus said that I'll look at him and say, depart from me because I never knew you. That there was a heart problem. We never, our hearts never connected. Yeah, you were doing these things, even in my name, but your heart's been in the wrong place. And Judas apparently was doing all the right things. Again, none of the apostles knew. From the outside looking in, it looked like Judas was as much part of them as they were, and yet his heart was not there. And there are charlatans today that will make you think that everything's okay, but their heart is not where it ought to be. And so I think that may serve as a cautionary tale for us to be careful, not only who we follow and who we listen to, but also to watch our own hearts, to make sure that our hearts are where they ought to be. The fourth thing that I would call us to notice is the thing that honestly we could spend hours upon hours fleshing out, and we're not going to do that tonight, but it's this idea of God's providential will, God's predestination of mankind in conjunction with the choices that we have as individuals. And it would appear that from the very beginning, this was the plan, that Judas was going to betray Jesus. And you ask the question, does that mean that God forced Judas to do this? Did he not have a choice? Well, I think he did have a choice, and I think he had the same choice that all the other apostles had. Any of them had intimate knowledge about where Jesus was going to be. Any of them could have betrayed Jesus the same way Judas did, but Judas chose to do it, and the others didn't. I believe that God's foreknowledge is such that he knew that's what Judas was going to do. Jesus knew that's what Judas was going to do because he knew Judas's heart. Could God have forced Judas's hand and said, you have to be the one to do this, and you know, drug him kicking and screaming to get the job done? He could have, but it wasn't going to be necessary because it was already in Judas's heart to make this particular decision. Um, and so, I don't know. That's the heaviest. That's the biggest one I think to wrestle with of all the questions that I have. There is sort of a telling verse, I think, that Jesus talks about in John's Gospel. I forget where it is, but in John's Gospel, Jesus talked about how that he had kept everyone that the Father had given him, referring to the 12. And he said, I've kept all of them except one. I haven't lost any of them except one. And it's almost as if Jesus had a hedge of protection around the 11 that he just didn't put around Judas. And what did that hedge of protection do? It protected them from themselves. It would seem, again, they all had the same opportunity, but only Judas was the one that made the decision. They all had the potential to make that decision. Judas made that decision to his own demise. It was his choice, and yet God knew, Jesus knew it was going to happen. Again, much we could talk about Calvinism and predestination, and those are deeper conversations that are worth talking about. But again, these are just simple observations for tonight. And then another thing, the fifth thing to think about, I think, is again another cautionary tale that the reason why I don't think God had to force Judas' hand, the reason why I don't think he had to push him in any direction, is because Judas' heart was never committed to the kingdom of God as Jesus brought it. He was committed to his own kingdom. And even the issues with the money, you know, that the money being wasted, that could have been, you know, when the perfume was anointed on Jesus, that was the moment that we all point to, and we want to talk about Judas's greed, and that's true. But I think the greed was just a symptom of something bigger, and that was that Judas's agenda was never going to be in line with Jesus' agenda. And maybe he did try to force his agenda. Maybe that's what he was trying to do. But that's sinful, right? Maybe you've heard me talk about Judas in that tone, that maybe he wasn't intending for Jesus to die, but yet he was trying to maybe push Jesus into responding in a way that he wanted him to respond. But that's not to excuse anything about what Judas did. What Judas did, whether he intended for Jesus to be put to death or not, what he did was he opted for his own agenda over God's. And that's sin any day of the week, right? That's not the way it's supposed to work. So again, I think the idea that Judas was more interested in his own kingdom than he was in Jesus' kingdom is a big part of the reason why it happened the way that it did. So let me summarize those 5 things if I could. I think completion of Old Testament prophecy to illustrate that God can make great things come from terrible situations, to illustrate that not everybody who appears to be an apostle actually has the right, or not just an apostle, it appears to be following Christ, actually has the right heart about things, that what was in Judas's heart from the beginning was what led him to make the decision that he made. And then obviously the thing that was in his heart was this, my agenda over God's agenda. I'm going to put first my kingdom rather than God's kingdom. So all that brings us to this statement: it would have been better for him if he had not been born. And the fact of the matter is, I don't believe, we don't see any evidence that Judas ever repented. We see that he regretted what he had done, and he tried to pay restitution. He tried to give the money back. But we don't really see any evidence that he ever repented. I believe that Judas' fate is hell, and hell being eternal separation from God. And so I think when Jesus says what he says here, he doesn't mean it in hyperbole. I think he means it very literally, that anyone who ends up eternally separated from God would be better off had they not been born. And Judas is he's the poster child for that. You know, that if he had not been born, that would have been better than eternity apart from God. And that seems to be the fate that he has. And there are more details about Judas and what happened that are going to come. We'll try to address those next Wednesday night and over the next few Wednesday nights, because there's a whole Passover meal to discuss, and other things that are going to be challenging that Jesus says in his relationship with Judas. So by all means, come be with us next Wednesday night. Hopefully I've given you food for thought, maybe questions you can bring back with you if you come on Wednesday. If you need us, again, let us know. We'll be praying for you, and trust that you'll be praying for us. Thank you for watching tonight. Please text me if you have any questions before next Wednesday. Have a good night.